Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and as we near the halfway point of the summer break, Ferrari have said that their strategic miscalculations over the last few races actually aren't indicative of a poor strategic decision-making team. They say their strategy is actually perfectly fine, they've done it right on occasions, and it's other things in their team that have cost them more points than their strategy. Is this mindset conducive to even holding on to second place in the Constructors? We'll see over the coming minutes. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, I wanted to mention pretty big news with regard to Aston Martin's new rear wing. Of course, you guys might have noticed in Hungary, they came up with a rather new and innovative idea, effectively using some sort of loophole in the regulations to give them a more squared off rear wing for better downforce that other teams didn't believe was possible in the rules and apparently shouldn't have been possible, but they found a way through it. Some teams initially were saying, okay, does this align with the rules? Because the idea of these much smoother rear wings we now have for these regulations is to reduce the impact of the dirty air coming off the back of the car, therefore making it harder to follow in the corners. Now, Aston Martin say they've done the simulations that actually this does not have a material effect on the airflow over the rear wing, and therefore it should be allowed in the regulations. The proposal might have been to oppose this to the FIA and say, okay, well look, Aston Martin's new rear wing, like it's creating downforce, yes, at the expense of actually having a car that, well, it can be followed just like the other cars can. They say it's perfectly fine, and I guess if the FIA thinks, well, it doesn't really go against the spirit of the rules, then they'll keep it around. Does mean that for circuits like Singapore, maybe even Zandvoort in a few weeks' time, we might see other teams pull this out, and even Aston Martin themselves have said, Mike Crack reckon, they're like, look, he reckons other teams will copy their new rear wing design. So pretty interesting stuff, I think, from Aston Martin themselves. Does, to a certain degree, it indicates their intention to be more of a front-running team than they presently are. I think maybe Fernando Alonso, that's what he sees in this team, that yes, right now Alpine have the faster car. They will do for the majority of, well, if not the entirety of this season, but in 1-2 years time, maybe it'll be a different story in terms of who actually has the upper hand there. And even Red Bull have said that they might look at this design because Red Bull are one of those teams that have great straight line speed, but their cornering hasn't been quite so good compared to a Ferrari that we're about to discuss. If they pull out this new rear wing, which did seem to create some results at a very high downforce circuit like Hungary for Aston Martin, then maybe that could help Red Bull to a certain extent, and Ferrari might also have to do a similar thing. But Ferrari aren't exactly helping themselves in other ways. This other was kind of incredible given the car that Ferrari have. They've only been on the podium at 8 races this season. Mercedes have been on the podium at 9 races and are only like, what, 30-40 points behind Ferrari in the Constructors' standings. Like, you can feasibly expect right now, based on the way this has been going, that Mercedes might get second place in the Constructors this season, which would of course be a massive surprise if you'd have told someone that after the first, 3, 4, 5 races of the season. But now it seems like, it's a good 50-50 chance probably that happens based on what we have seen recently with these teams, and the fact that probably Ferrari might have to take more penalties than Mercedes will. So a few things to mention on Ferrari, because everyone's been asking them, like, okay, what's going on in your team? Why are you terrible at everything? Like, why are you always frustrating the fans like this? And when do they actually expect to win a world championship? Right, that's what Binotto said, that, okay, this season they weren't planning to win, they were just planning to be competitive, which I suppose they have been. But like, look, things have got to change there internally if they actually want to win, because the advantage they had at the start of this year to what it is now is just, it's very frustrating, I'm sure, for many Ferrari fans out there. One of the things that some people said could be a good idea is team orders, right? Look, team orders are always a bit of a hot topic in Formula 1, but I think Ferrari do have to be a little bit more decisive in what they do for their championship battle. They want to respect Sainz, they want to respect Leclerc, obviously, but look, it was relatively clear after 3 races that Leclerc was going to be the chief title challenger, and if you want to compete with the Verstappen and the system that Red Bull have set up around him, or if Mercedes get good again, a Hamilton, or even a Russell potentially, because those two drivers are pretty much neck and neck in points so far this season, but Verstappen and Perez is a pretty obvious setup. Verstappen's the main guy, Perez is the support guy, that's just how it's going to be. They don't say it outright, Red Bull, but it's pretty much an unwritten rule or an unknown, unsaid fact in that Red Bull camp. Ferrari have been less clear, and they don't always give an advantage to their driver who actually finds themselves in the pole position for the championship. The key example really was at Silverstone, where Leclerc was leading the race. He had the best pace on the day, and he had a great chance to go on to win, but instead they prioritized Sainz during the safety car period. He wins the race, Leclerc loses out on points, and his gap falls further behind. So that's something they've got to think about, I think, Ferrari, because it's not something that they want to do, but realistically, actually, because of how closely competitive these cars currently are and will continue to be, this might be a factor Ferrari have to really employ if they want to compete in future seasons, because obviously they've kind of blown this one. Now look, Carlos Sainz wants to defend the team. He says there's not a fundamental problem in the team. He reckons the team's just got to keep maturing. Like, there were some races this season where they did okay. Austria was a good example, even though, okay, well, you know, in fairness, strategically, Austria was a good example, but Sainz's car blew up and Leclerc had that throttle issue, so there's practically been no clean races outside of, I guess, Bahrain, the first race of the season with the 1-2, that Ferrari have had all season long. And this was really quite the statement, I thought, from Mattia Binotto, because we've heard him imply this before, but him to say this so explicitly is quite the surprise, saying that, look, they must improve in all aspects of their performance, right? It hasn't been good across the board, but their strategy is not an area of weakness. They say there's other things they want to focus on, not strategy. And that's the thing. Yes, their car needs to get more reliable. Yes, there's other things they can improve on, but look, if your strategy isn't good, you're going to lose points every weekend to Red Bull, who always nail it week in, week out. And he says, look, I believe we've also made the right decisions. I mean, look, a broken clock is right twice a day, but I mean, yeah, this is what he says. I have no doubts that we always need to make progress. We need to improve on aerodynamics, the chassis, the power unit, the strategy, and all aspects that can be improved. That being said, though, I think that we have a great team dealing with strategy. Yeah, interesting. And I don't think that that is our weakness. Races like Monaco, Silverstone, or Paul Ricard were considered problematic on this front, but I don't see the group as a problem because I believe we have also made the right decisions. So, I mean, yeah, we'll look at these races in a second. The Monaco decisions, the Silverstone decisions, the Paul Ricard decisions, and also most certainly the Hungarian Grand Prix decisions. But as he says, look, from my point of view, these races were difficult decisions, perhaps unfortunate, but not always wrong. So I don't think it is our weakness right now, saying that, yeah, strategy, not really a big problem for us. It's mostly other things, aero, chassis, power unit, because that's what they said after Hungary, that their strategy wasn't the problem at Hungary. It was the fact that their car just wasn't good enough on the weekends, which might have been true that Ferrari didn't have the race pace in the race on Sunday that they expected to have, but still, if they made more intelligent, strategic decisions, Leclerc probably still wins that race, and even if he doesn't, it's a P2, P3 for Sainz and Leclerc, or at least Leclerc's right up there. As it turns out, that wasn't their case at all. P4, P6, not even being on the podium, was frankly an embarrassment given the way they started the weekend and given the fact that their car was clearly the strongest theoretically around that circuit. So wanted to look honestly about the kind of races so far this season and how they've been going. The first 5-6 races or so didn't really have any strategic mess ups from Ferrari. Bahrain was great. Saudi Arabia, I think they might think going back that, okay, maybe they should have run a little bit less rear wing because Verstappen had way too much in a straight line. Australia, of course, was great. At this point, already Leclerc had about a 45-point advantage, 44-point advantage over Max Verstappen after his 2 DNFs at this point in the season. Of course, yes, Carlos Sainz spun out at Australia and had a difficult time at Imola as well, and also Leclerc made that mistake, right? But going after Miami, things were still looking pretty good. But in Spain, that's when things started to go wrong, where, of course, the engine explosion happens for Leclerc. Sainz also had a spin early on, which didn't help him, and then Monaco was really the one where they needed a bounce back at Monaco. They could have done a 1-2 there's no doubt, and then they made the decisions when, I mean, look, it was a tricky condition, it was wet, was it inters, was it straight from, wets all the way to slick tyres, right, as Sainz wanted to do, and then Leclerc, they went for the conservative route, but the problem is they just pitted Sainz, they tried to double stack, Leclerc lost time and ended up finding himself at the back of the train. It was just an absolute disaster for Ferrari there, and Charles Leclerc at his home Grand Prix, he didn't make any mistakes, he stuck it on pole, I'm pretty sure, delivered the goods in the race, and then strategically, we're trying to change from wets to inters to softs, or to slick tyres, that's when they really messed up. And then Azerbaijan, again, that was a mechanical issue with both of the cars. So Spain, Azerbaijan, and Austria, they've had these mechanical failures, which probably have cost them more points than their strategic mess-ups have, right? Because once you lose an engine, you've then got to take penalties, as Leclerc did in Canada, and also as Sainz did most recently in France, and that kind of put them on the back foot from a strategic perspective as well. Canada, I suppose, from a strategy perspective was okay. Great Britain, of course, was one of the big issues in Silverstone, where Leclerc probably should have won. Verstappen had damage and ended up Verstappen only lost 6 points that weekend, given the fact that he had damage to the floor of his car to Leclerc, because they could have pitted him, put the soft on, kept him at the front. They didn't want to do the double stack. Maybe they had kind of, flashbacks of what was going on back in Monaco and didn't want to do the double stack Ferrari. That cost Leclerc the win. Then Austria was actually pretty good. Apart from the explosion they had on Sainz's car, I thought they did a pretty good job in it was a simple strategy they did at Austria. Verstappen would pit, and then a couple laps later, pit your lead guy, and then overtake him again with the fresher tyres. It was a pretty simple strategy, but they had so much more pace than the Red Bulls that they could have pretty much done anything and won that race, to be honest. And then 2 races back-to-back since then with more questionable decisions. Like, of course, like Leclerc had his issue and he spun off the track anyway, but Sainz again, right, asking him to pit when he was in the middle of a battle. Like, they could have maybe got Sainz to go to the end on those mediums and tried to push for further up the grid rather than settling for less points. And then even in Hungary, of course, that was a complete disaster. Like, with the vintage medium, hard, soft strategy for Leclerc, which was definitely not on the Pirelli recommended list. So, I mean, yeah, what do you guys think about this? Do you think that Binotto's got any idea what he's talking about here? Like, is their strategy department perfectly fine? But I don't really think you can find any team on the grid that has made this many mess-ups that have cost them this many points. Other teams have made some questionable calls further down the grid, but at least in terms of the front runners trying to fight for a championship, I think it's really difficult to argue that there's nothing wrong in that team, especially because of how consistent a trend this has been over the last several years. But yes, we're about halfway through the summer break now, so well, shortly we will have racing back on the agenda. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.